Thanksgiving is here, and with it comes the warm glow of family gatherings, the irresistible pull of holiday shopping, and the bittersweet close of another year. Across the country, Americans are coming together, some at crowded dinner tables, others braving Black Friday sales, and a few finding solace in quieter traditions. It's a season meant for gratitude, for celebration, and for setting aside our differences to reflect on what unites us. But as a turkey gets carved and the holiday playlist rolls out, the cracks in our collective facade are hard to ignore. For Democrats, the sting of a recent election loss has left the party in turmoil. While some within the ranks are quietly reflecting on what went wrong, the louder and more influential voices are doubling down. Instead of reassessing their strategies, they're pushing for more divisiveness, framing every compromise as betrayal and deepening the polarization that has already fractured the nation. It's a refusal to learn, to adapt, or to move on, and it's fueling a cultural climate where tension and stubbornness are taking center stage. And nowhere is that more evident than around the Thanksgiving table. For many, this holiday season isn't about coming together. It's about pulling apart. Politics has become the wedge, driving families to skip gatherings, set strict rules for discussion, or even cut ties altogether. The idea of a peaceful holiday seems almost impossible when political divisions overshadow personal connections. Let's take a closer look at how these dynamics are playing out and how Americans are choosing isolation over the messiness of bridging divides.
Liberal New Yorker Elsie Paulino is packing her bags, not to go home for Thanksgiving. She's flying to Europe to avoid her family, who voted for Trump.
I love my family. I love my parents. Just because we have those opposing views doesn't mean that the love goes away. So yeah, I felt a lot of guilt, but at the end of the day, I had to protect my peace. I had to do what was best for me.
Texan Elizabeth Bradshaw is also skipping the traditional family holiday meal. What are you going to do instead?
I'm going to go see Wicked with my other friend who's not going home to see her family.
It's hard not to raise an eyebrow at the decisions of these two women to avoid their families during Thanksgiving, particularly when you consider the context and broader implications. Their choices to fly to Europe or catch a showing of Wicked might feel like self-care in the moment, but they also reflect a troubling trend largely fueled by the media. For years now, left-wing outlets have perpetuated a narrative that if your family voted differently, particularly for Trump, it's not just acceptable but necessary to distance yourself from them. This isn't about protecting peace. It's about buying into a divisive ideology that discourages open dialogue and prioritizes conformity over connection. At its core, the decision to skip family gatherings because of political differences is inherently flawed. The very idea that adults cannot sit across a table, share a meal, and talk through disagreements highlights a lack of emotional and intellectual maturity. When did we become so fragile that opposing views within our families justify outright abandonment? It's worth noting that this behavior overwhelmingly seems to come from Democrats, particularly liberal white women. There's a noticeable pattern here, an elevation of emotion over reason and a desperate need for ideological homogeneity. It's as though they've been conditioned to equate disagreement with betrayal, a mindset that leaves little to no room for growth or understanding. Take Elizabeth Bradshaw's choice to see Wicked instead of spending Thanksgiving with her family. The irony here is rich. She opts for a self-described woke musical over the opportunity to build real, lasting memories with her loved ones. This kind of rebellion might seem fashionable to those with a low appetite for critical thinking, rebellion wrapped in glitter and Broadway tunes, but it's a sort of choice that doesn't age well. As time passes and family members are no longer around, the missed opportunities to connect, laugh, and reminisce become deeply felt. What seems like a stand for independence today will likely look more like a shallow, performative gesture in hindsight. Beyond the personal consequences, these decisions reflect a broader societal issue. The inability to engage with differing viewpoints, or worse, the refusal to even try, is a hallmark of political immaturity. When you choose to cut ties with family over politics, you're not just isolating yourself, you're reinforcing a destructive cycle of division. The idea that one must protect their peace from family members who love them but think differently is frankly an emotional manipulation. It's a rhetorical move that frames any disagreement as a personal attack, leaving no room for reconciliation or understanding. Moreover, this behavior often comes with a hefty dose of self-righteousness. Notice how the narrative conveniently positions these individuals as the heroes of their own story, bravely avoiding the so-called toxicity of differing opinions. This framing is a logical fallacy. It assumes that disagreement inherently equates to harm, which is simply untrue. Families are messy, yes, but they're also one of the few places where you can encounter differing views in a relatively safe environment. Avoiding that dynamic not only stunts personal growth, but also perpetuates the broader cultural divide. Ultimately, choosing to avoid your family over politics is a decision rooted in short-term thinking and emotional reasoning. It's a false rebellion that sacrifices real, meaningful relationships for the illusion of ideological purity. parody. The hard truth is that these women and others like them aren't protecting their peace. They're isolating themselves in an echo chamber that reinforces their own biases. And as time goes on, it's a choice that's likely to leave them not only politically unchallenged, but also personally unfulfilled. Now, the day before Thanksgiving, the Lincoln Project dropped a video that perfectly encapsulates the divisive narrative dominating our culture. Instead of promoting unity during a holiday meant for gratitude and togetherness, the video doubles down on partisan rhetoric, framing political differences as insurmountable conflicts. It's yet another example of how some groups are using the season of reflection to stoke division rather than bridge gaps. Let's take a closer look at how this message feeds into the growing chasm in American families.
Thanksgiving, family coming together, millions traveling across this beautiful country. Some conversations will be tough, but you're tough too. You may have been on the losing side of this election, but you are on the right side of history. We're still in this fight, and so are you. You may not feel thankful this year, but America is still here, and still a nation of enormous blessings. Yes, we'll have to fight for her, but she'll always be worth fighting for. It won't be easy, but America is stronger than him, stronger than hate, bigger than one election. So this week, let's give thanks, and next week, let's give them hell.
The Lincoln Project's Thanksgiving video is a masterclass in unintentional irony, framing the simple act of sitting down with family for dinner as a Herculean act of bravery. It suggests that enduring a meal with loved ones who might have different political views requires grit and fortitude, as if conversation over turkey is a real front line of American democracy. The tone is meant to be inspirational, but it veers so far into melodrama that it feels like parody. In fact, I had to watch it twice, double-check the channel, and read the comments to confirm it was real, and to my amazement, people in the comments were taking it entirely seriously. The videos claim that those on the losing side of this election are on the right side of history is another layer of absurdity. History, after all, isn't some single immutable truth. It's written, rewritten, and debated over. And as Trump's presidential history has proven, the first draft of history is often not just wrong, it can be shaped by partisan narratives. During his time in office, Trump faced an onslaught of hoaxes and accusations, from the Russia collusion narrative to impeachment efforts that now appear increasingly politically motivated. Over the years, much of this narrative has unraveled, with evidence exposing these efforts as less about justice and more about partisanship. Today, it's broadly recognized that many of the attacks were baseless, making the continued reliance on these discredited tactics feel not only uninspired, but also desperate. Ultimately, this ad comes across less like a call to action and more like a pep talk for sore losers. The dramatic tone, the overuse of patriotic platitudes, and the laughable conclusion to give them hell next week all add up to something so over the top, it's hard to take seriously. While it may resonate with the deeply partisan, for many, it's just another example of how tone-deaf and out of touch these kinds of campaigns have become. Thanksgiving is a time to give thanks, not to use the holiday as another platform for political grievance. Instead of bridging divides, this video only reinforces them, wrapped in a layer of cringe-inducing self-righteousness. Now, while some use Thanksgiving as a platform to deliver divisive messages, others are taking their frustrations to the streets. At the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, pro-Palestinian protesters disrupted the iconic event, jumping barriers and blocking the procession. Here's what unfolded during the brief but chaotic demonstration.
Free Palestine! 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 Palestine is our demand! Free Palestine! Free Palestine! Free Palestine!
It's mind-boggling that some people are so blinded by ideology that they end up actively advocating against their own interests, and often against the interests of their very causes they claim to support. The protesters disrupting the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade in New York, for instance, might believe they're championing Palestinian rights, but their actions reveal a dangerous naivete. By demanding arms embargoes and opposing genocide without a clear understanding of the complexities involved, they inadvertently play into the hands of the military-industrial complex they likely oppose. These demonstrators fail to grasp the historical and geopolitical realities of their demands, unintentionally calling for more foreign intervention from a government that has repeatedly shown a willingness to use military force, even against its geopolitical adversaries. It's not just counterproductive, it's outright reckless. The U.S. foreign policy apparatus thrives on instability and conflict, using these situations to justify endless expansion of military involvement abroad. In advocating for more government action in international conflicts, these protesters serve as unwitting enablers of the very war hawks they likely despise. What's especially troubling is how their empathy, the quality they likely see as their greatest strength, is being weaponized against them. It's an emotional manipulation tactic as old as time, used to justify everything from wars to sanctions. By exploiting their compassion for the suffering of others, those pushing for greater intervention secure public buy-in for policies that often exacerbate the very crisis they claim to resolve. Instead of fostering peace, these policies deepen conflicts, destabilize regions, and leave millions worse off. These protesters don't seem to realize they're being used as tools in a much larger game. Their calls for justice and peace, while well-intentioned, ignore the long history of how interventions, military or otherwise, rarely align with the lofty ideals they proclaim. Instead of advocating for sustainable diplomatic solutions, they demand actions that almost always result in more destruction and suffering. Ultimately, this spectacle at the Thanksgiving parade isn't a testament to activism, it's a display of ignorance. These individuals are so consumed by their perceived moral righteousness that they fail to recognize how their actions and demands contribute to the very problems they oppose. It's a sobering reminder that without a deep understanding of history and geopolitics, even the most empathetic intentions can be co-opted and turned into tools for harm. Now, while some take their frustrations to the streets, others are finding more, let's say, unconventional ways to process their post-election blues. On the shores of Lake Michigan, a group of liberals gathered for a primal scream event, venting their frustration in an audible and rather public release of emotion. What followed was a mix of catharsis, trolling, and a reminder that even in moments of collective angst, politics never seem too far away. Let's take a look. This primal scream event on the shores of Lake Michigan is a textbook example of performative activism at its most self-indulgent. It doesn't address the issues these individuals claim to care about, nor does it lead to any tangible change. Instead, it looks like a gathering of upper-middle-class drama enthusiasts, more focused on theatrical self-expression than on confronting the real-world challenges they claim to be frustrated by. Jumping into the water and screaming into the void may feel cathartic in the moment, but it achieves absolutely nothing beyond satisfying a fleeting desire for attention. This kind of spectacle highlights a deeper problem with certain forms of modern activism, a lack of focus on meaningful action. It's not about solving problems or engaging in thoughtful dialogue. It's about being seen. These people are clearly dissatisfied, but rather than channeling their frustrations into strategies that could create real change, they opt for a public display that offers a little more than symbolic release. The result? They look like fools, seeking validation through empty gestures instead of facing the hard, unglamorous work of making a difference. From a rhetorical standpoint, events like this rely heavily on emotional appeals rather than logic or strategy. The primal scream is meant to symbolize collective anguish, but without context or follow-up, it communicates nothing of substance. It's an attempt to draw attention to their frustrations, but it lacks any clear message or solution. This kind of approach employs a logical fallacy of appeal to emotion, assuming that showing raw feeling will garner sympathy or prompt change. Instead, it comes across as self-indulgent, alienating those who might otherwise be inclined to listen. Another issue here is the inherent narcissism of this kind of demonstration. The emphasis is not on the cause, but on the individuals performing their frustration. It's activism as theater, where the participants are both the audience and the stars. This creates a distorted focus. Instead of tackling the issues at hand, they prioritize their own need for expression. And while self-expression has its place, it doesn't belong at the center of the movements that aim to create real societal impact. Ultimately, gatherings like this are a case study in wasted energy. Instead of screaming into the ether, these individuals could have been organizing, planning, or engaging with their communities in ways that might lead to actual progress. Instead, they've chosen a path that is performative, fleeting, and frankly embarrassing. It's a stark reminder that activism without purpose is little more than noise. And while some express their frustrations through performance or protest, others take to the airwaves to deliver their grievances in full force. Enter Joy Reid, who used their platform platform to unleash a fiery tirade about Thanksgiving and the political divides it highlights. In what can only be described as a minute of concentrated vitriol, pared down from a full 10-minute meltdown, Reid lashes out at Trump supporters, delivering sharp barbs and dismissive remarks. Let's dive into the highlights and unpack her message.
These are the people who say the undocumented, who they get to call illegal immigrants, like the Pilgrims had permission to come here, have to suffer the consequences of their actions, right? They made the choice to overstay their visas or come into our country illegally. So if they get deported, consequences. But you right-wingers shouldn't have to suffer the consequences of your votes? You don't want to be around me because I voted for fascism. No fair. I'm coughing on you with COVID, but you want me to wear a mask for your safety? No fair. My body, my choice. Well, here's an alternative thought. Make your own dinner, MAGA. Make your own sandwiches. Wipe your own tears. Troll amongst yourselves with Elon and leave us alone. You got your heart's desire, the president you dreamed of, and worship instead of Jesus. And this time, you didn't even have to storm the Capitol, smash the windows, or try to kill police officers or issue death threats to poll workers. See? You did it just by voting this time. Congrats. You got your way. And he even got away with breaking the law. Yay. But if you expect the 73 million who voted for the prosecutor, not the felon, and particularly the 92% of black women who voted for Kamala to give you a cookie for your vote, a trophy, a hug, a high five, you might be asking too much. If we want to eat with you, we will. But if we just want some peace over the holidays and we don't want to put up with your trolling while we eat our tofurkey, get over it. Stop acting like we owe you. And for God's sakes, stop whining. It's embarrassing. Our Thanksgiving, our choice.
It looks like this Thanksgiving we got parades and tirades. Anyway, Joy Reid's Thanksgiving tirade is so over the top, it's hard to take seriously. I mean, is she delivering political analysis or auditioning for some role on an off-Broadway satire? Her monologue is a blend of frustration, misinformation, and wild accusations that ultimately say more about her bitterness than about the issues she's ranting about. Let's start with the foundation of her argument, or lack thereof. Reid equates voting for Trump with actions like overstaying visas or crossing borders illegally. That's not just a false equivalence, it's a complete misunderstanding of how democracy works. Voting, whether for Trump, Biden, or anyone else, is not a crime. It's a fundamental right. Comparing it to breaking immigration laws is ridiculous and just a lazy argumentation. Then she goes on this scattered tangent about COVID, mask wearing, and my body, my choice. Like she's throwing everything she can at the wall to see what sticks. None of these points connect. It's just a list of grievances strung together with no logical thread. This isn't political commentary, it's a temper tantrum. And let's not overlook her hyperbole. Trump supporters worship him instead of Jesus, really? Talk about inflammatory. What's ironic is that Reid accuses her political opponents of cult-like behavior while ignoring the near religious fervor some on the left have for their own leaders. That's the pot calling the kettle black if I've ever seen it. Then there's the misinformation. She claims Trump got away with breaking the law, except last time I checked, years of investigations and nonstop accusations have turned up, what exactly? Nothing substantial. If there was proof, we would have seen it by now, but hey, why let facts get in the way of a good narrative? Oh, and her point about 92% of black women voting for Kamala? Let's unpack that. Reid uses this statistic as a way to frame Kamala Harris support among black women as unquestionable loyalty, but it's a shallow and reductive argument. Kamala's appeal to black voters is far from the monolithic support Reid portrays. This oversimplification erases the nuanced reason why black women vote the way they do and reduces their political agency to a talking point. Reid isn't celebrating their voices. She's co-opting them to make her argument sound more authoritative. It's disingenuous to act as if these voters are a single bloc driven solely by identity politics. Black women, like any voting group, have diverse perspectives and priorities. By framing them as a political monolith, Reid dismisses the complexity of their motivations, turning what should be a nuanced discussion into a shallow talking point designed to pander to her audience. And then there's her tone, the make your own sandwiches, wipe your own tears bit. It's not clever, it's petty, it's the kind of quip you throw out when you're losing an argument and don't have anything meaningful to say. Honestly, the whole thing comes across like a sore loser trying to mask their frustration with bad jokes. At the heart of this rant is pure performative outrage. It's not about fostering dialogue or proposing solutions. It's about riling up her audience and keeping them angry. That's not activism, that's theater. Reid's not trying to engage in meaningful discourse. She's trying to score points with an echo chamber. And let's face it, this meltdown isn't just about politics. It's personal. Her network is struggling, her influence is waning, and it's clear she knows it. So instead of offering a thoughtful critique, she delivers a 10-minute emotional outburst that ultimately does nothing but reinforce the divide she claims to despise. Joy Reid's monologue isn't political commentary. It's a cautionary tale. When you let anger and bitterness drive your message, you lose credibility, and you lose the ability to reach anyone outside your bubble. And that, more than anything, is what makes her rant so absurd.
Conservatives fighting back against corporate DEI may have scored their biggest victory yet. Walmart, the nation's largest private employer, just announced it is rolling back its diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives amid outcries over so-called corporate wokeism and claims that DEI is more divisive than inclusive. Walmart says it's ending racial equity training programs for staff, evaluating programs designed to increase supplier diversity, reviewing funding of pride events, and removing sexual or transgender products marketed to children. Now, Walmart defends the move, saying, quote, "We have been on a journey and know we aren't perfect, but every decision comes from a place of wanting to foster a sense of belonging." Other companies making similar moves. They include Harley-Davidson, Tractor Supply, and John Deere.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives often began with good intentions, creating opportunities for historically marginalized groups and fostering a sense of belonging. However, over time, many of these programs reveal themselves to be deeply flawed, even counterproductive. Rather than uniting people, DEI efforts frequently emphasize differences, creating divisions based on race and identity, rather than fostering collaboration and shared goals. One of the more glaring issues with DEI programs is how they disproportionately benefited white women, the largest beneficiaries of affirmative action in the workplace, according to research from Harvard and Princeton. While these initiatives were often marketed as tools to uplift minorities, they ended up reinforcing existing inequities under the guise of progress. At its core, society should be based on merit, not race or identity. The most effective way to foster true equity is by promoting opportunities based on skills, competence, and effort rather than imposing blanket policies that often result in resentment and further division. Walmart's decision to scale back these initiatives reflects a growing recognition that DEI, as it has been implemented, is neither sustainable nor fair. Moving forward, companies and institutions should focus on merit-based policies that bring people together and create equal opportunities for success regardless of identity. Anyway, you tell me what you think in the comments down below. Have a terrific day. Peace.